I wanted to do something a little bit different in this episode and just have a minute to talk to you about something that is serious. Not light, fluffy, fun stuff, but something that I think really matters and affects all of us, and that's just mental and emotional health, how we deal with sadness, and what we do with the inevitable suffering that comes our way at various points in our life. Right now we're back in Massachusetts. It's me and Lilo here at my mother-in-law's place. Stephanie is out flying, and every so often we have to come back here. We do a little bit of work, and it kind of changes things up because life out here in the suburbs of Boston is certainly not as adventurous as it is when we're living in our trailer. We're out on the road and we're traveling all the time. Shortly before we commuted back out here, Lilo and I were on the road in the last couple episodes together, and I got some really bad news while I was out on the road that one of my best friends took his own life. And my friend Chris, he was in episode 25 of the vlog. He was one of the most unselfish and the most giving people that I've ever met. He gave an incredible amount to my family in the whole time that the car thing was going on and the CRV was totaled and we were in Las Vegas. We were staying at his place. We would not have been able to get the new car and handle things with the old car if we hadn't been able to stay with him, and he was super generous about giving us time and space and food and like doing everything that he could to help us out. And in the meanwhile, while he was helping us out, he was wrestling with some really significant emotional burdens that he had going on. And we had some idea about that, and we were trying to help. And I was fortunate to be able to have some time to talk to him and really say all the things that I felt deep down. Not as though it was like, okay, I'm going to say goodbye, but that it was like, okay, I know that he's having this problem, and I want to make sure that I can give everything that I have to give as a resource to try to help and to see what that will do. And I've been struggling a lot over the last week or so since I got this news. There's sadness that goes along with this, just kind of an emptiness, numbness, a feeling of what was it that I said or couldn't have said that couldn't make it worthwhile to keep trying. And there's also a feeling of thankfulness that I had that opportunity, which is something that so many people don't get in these kind of cases, just to be able to say those things. But at the end of the day, even if you say all the right things and you're there and you make yourself available, that doesn't solve anything necessarily. It gives me some comfort, and I think it gave him some knowledge of the love that I had, but it didn't change the final outcome of the situation. And what I've realized is that there's a certain amount of suffering in our lives that is going to happen. We don't have a choice about it. We can't avoid it. We can't hack our life and rig and engineer and work our way through it to the point where we remove suffering. And I got a question about this on social media. It was on my Instagram, which is @livingvertical. And the context of that question was actually in relationship to living with type 1 diabetes. How do I keep from being sad at the emotional burden that goes with living day in and day out, every day of your life, for the rest of your life, with an expensive, frustrating, tiresome, invisible chronic illness? There's a lot to hate about living with a chronic illness. And it was kind of interesting for me because I've never felt like I've had that sort of burden, or at least I've never felt like that burden was heavy in living with a chronic illness. But the question came at the same time as my dealing with my friend's passing And that is something that I felt very heavily. And that's something that's really made me think about what is the answer? Like, how do we deal with this sadness? And how do we work with it and live with it? Because the option to just ignore it is unhealthy and impossible. The option to avoid it doesn't exist. So it got me thinking about this general principle, which is that suffering is a part of life, and we don't have a choice about whether or not it happens. We have a choice about what we do with it. And that is really what in the past has enabled me to not feel the weight of the burden of living with type 1 diabetes. And that's something that I hadn't yet really wrapped my head around in terms of the passing of my friend. And that was the reason why I've been feeling that so much more heavily. And so my thought is that by writing about it and talking about it, I can help take the things that I've learned that have been successful in other areas where an emotional burden is present, but where I've learned to carry that effectively. I could take that and apply that to this new burden and the grief that I've been feeling and dealing with and that loss, and hopefully help out some other people and connect the dots. Because one of the keys to dealing with sadness, in my mind, is acceptance. So I wrote a blog at livingvertical.org, and in that blog, there were 3 main points that I looked at to say, this is how I've kept my chronic illness from being a burden in the past. And these are the 3 strategies that I'm kind of applying to the passing of my friend to try to assimilate that so that it doesn't become a burden that drags me down, so that I'm able to process it in a way that's healthy. And mental health is a huge thing, and there's a big stigma. People don't like talking about it. I don't feel that obligation to be quiet about these things. I know even just living with a chronic illness, being able to reach out and say, hey, you know what? This is hard and it sucks sometimes. That's a really big deal, and a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing that. And the reason why I have this YouTube channel and the reason why I post about adventure is because adventure is that window, it's that context that I view everything else through. It's a positive lens that I can look through and examine, in many cases, the shitty things in my life, like a chronic illness, like the loss of my friend, and apply the difficulty to something positive, because that's what adventure is. It's taking something that is difficult that you do intentionally in order to reach an end that is beneficial. And so being able to take that mindset and apply it is really useful. And that's the whole concept behind the AdventureRx, because it's medicine. It's medicine for your mind. The way that you look at challenges and obstacles, that's so important. If you feel depression or you feel emotional burden, you're normal. I'm pretty sure that most people feel that. I just don't think that a lot of people understand fully the importance of communicating that, and how important it is, and that there are ways to communicate it and interact with those feelings positively. So I think the first and the most basic part of dealing with any kind of emotional burden is accepting it. And this requires, at least in my experience, requires a little bit of radical self-acceptance, to the point where you're kind of having to trick yourself. Because I don't look at diabetes as being something abnormal. To me, it's 100% normal. I don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, this is something that I have to deal with that the rest of the world doesn't. There is, like, the rest of the world not having diabetes is 0% of my thought process. To me, this is 100% normal. So I don't feel bad because I have expectations that, like, oh, this should go away, or this never should have happened to me, or anything like that. I'm not trying to criticize people who feel that way, but there's a choice that we make to either engage that self-talk where we wake up in the morning and say, why me, or this again, versus waking up in the morning and saying, yep, this is exactly what I expect to happen. This is totally normal, and I'm going to embrace it. And it's kind of silly, and it's tricking yourself in a way, but it works, because once you fully accept something like that, then instead of having it stand apart from everything else and be this special big problem that gets this special treatment that isn't subject to the rules of dealing with challenges that work everywhere else in your life, it just becomes another thing. And yeah, there's logistical challenges, like I said earlier, that you have to deal with, but it's not untouchable. It's not something that is beyond help. Part of accepting it is allowing it to become part of everything in your life, but in a positive sense. So that for me, the climbing is part of my diabetes. Diabetes is part of my climbing. I don't have to deal with diabetes as this big, awful, scary thing. I have to deal with diabetes as part of my climbing. And so by incorporating it into something that I love and something that I'm passionate about, it becomes something that works for me. It's something that I don't try to avoid. And I'm happy to have that outlet to be able to talk about it, to be able to think about it, to be able to interact with it. And any kind of struggle that you have, any kind of burden that you're carrying, it needs an outlet. You can't just carry it and expect to fix it and just leave it at that. You have to accept it so fully that it's allowed into every area of your life, and then it's given an outlet through the creative process that is involved in whatever it is that you do, so that you have a way to let it in and then let it out. The other thing is influence, and this is something that is kind of a short part of how I feel about all this, but you can't control a lot of things in your life. I couldn't control what my friend chose to do, and that's very hurtful to me, but I was able to control the communication that I had with him. I was able to control what I told him. And while that certainly doesn't solve the problem, being able to exert all the influence that you have makes a big difference. Same thing with type 1 diabetes, right? Like, I can't control the fact that sometimes I'm going to get stressed out or I'm going to get sick and my blood sugar is going to go up. That's something that's going to happen. But on the remaining 360 days of the year when that's not the case, I can control diet, I can control exercise, I can control my sleeping habits, my routines. There's so much that I can control. And part of being able to separate yourself from sadness is being able to look at what you're doing and saying, you know what, I have done everything that I possibly can. I've exhausted all the options that I have that I can control, and that makes it a lot easier to accept the fact that, you know what, if I'm having a bad day, if I'm feeling this sadness, then that's not my fault. It's not because I didn't do something that I could have done. If we go back to acceptance, part of that is it's going to happen. You're going to feel sad. You're going to have bad days. And so instead of expecting it not to happen, you're prepared for it to happen, and you're using influence over the things that you can control. And then the last thing is investment. And if you've accepted the fact that things are going to go wrong and you're going to have suffering as part of your life, and you're using that acceptance to influence everything that you possibly can to do your very best and not fret about the things that you can't control, but to really leverage all the things that you can. Investment is the principle that says, I'm going to use the fact that I know the bad times are going to come back to put as much as I can in the bank, so that when those bad times come back and I've done everything that I can do to, do the work to keep things from going wrong, but they come back anyways, I'm going to invest the time so that I have something good to hold on to, something to look at that keeps me positive and that keeps me from going over the falls. Because in the loss of my friend's life recently, one of my other good friends was comforting me, and she dealt with suicide before. And she said, you can't think about anything other than, you have to make a conscious choice to just hold on to the good shit, because that's all that matters. That's all you have left. And the reality is we all spend a lot of time in our life investing in things and putting time into stuff. And we find when something really catastrophic happens that we haven't invested in good stuff that we can hang on to. We've invested in physical things, we've invested in financially, we've invested in jobs, we've invested in things that don't give us anything to hold on to, that don't give us that good shit to hold on to. And we need to do that. And it's really easy to say, what's the point? I'm just going to sit here and mope. I'm going to feel bad because I'm dealing with this burden, because I'm carrying this baggage. But it's a lot more important to say, in my mind, because I've accepted it, I'm going to use my influence to go out and make the best investment that I can of my time so that when this suffering, when this hardship rolls around again, I have pictures, I have videos, I have memories. These things are like a window. They're an escape hatch that allows me to get outside of my current state of suffering, to realize that suffering is the middle. Suffering is not the end. So real quick to summarize, acceptance. Suffering is going to happen. We need to recognize that fact and not feel bad about the fact that we can't stop it. There's not a solution. There's not a way out. We can't stop the suffering. We can only choose how we use it. Either we use it as a reason to give up, or we use it as a reason to influence, which is the second point, influence everything that we possibly can, control the things that are under our control, and then use that influence and acceptance to invest our time in our experiences, in our memories, in photos, in videos, in some sort of creative process that gets us out of our own head, that gets us out of the cycle of worrying and feeling bad that we can't stop the suffering, but rather that puts us in a productive space. Because again, suffering is the middle, it's not the end. So that's where I've been. That's what I've been dealing with for the last couple of days. I hope that this is of some use to you. I'd like to hear your comments, what you think about any and all of this. Drop a comment below, subscribe to this channel. The AdventureRx, we're adventure with purpose, because adventure is great medicine. It's medicine for your mind. And that's what I'm trying to pursue adventure for. And that's what I want to share here to give back to you. And we'll see you on Friday in the next episode.